Over the next couple of weeks, I'm going to be making a brand new Gobo. Now, I've got a little Gobo here that I made previously. It's good, it works well, great for isolating amps and group recordings, but there are a couple of areas for improvement and a few tweaks I want to make. Now, the Gobo I made previously had one major flaw, which is that its wheels weren't wide enough apart. It keeps falling over unless you have it in a very specific position. So in planning the new Gobo, I'm going to need to find a solution for that. The other thing is this panel works purely through absorption, turning sound into heat, and one other slightly more complex process which we'll discuss later. It does very little to diffuse or spread out the energy from the sound that reaches it. I'd like the new panel to be a little bit more versatile than that. So with that in mind, we can start planning properly. I need to move it around in the studio. The thinnest point it will pass through is about 100 centimeters and the shortest is 190, so we'll say maximum 90 by 180, just to play it safe. The company I get the wool from, which I use as the absorption material, they sell in thickness increments of 2.5 centimeters, so we'll go for a body thickness of about 7.5 centimeters. I don't want this one to fall over, so the wheels are going to be 5 centimeters off from each side attached to a thin piece of wood, so the thickness will be a total of 17.5 centimeters. And I want to incorporate a diffuser on the back, so I'll have fabric all over one side and on the other side a thin wooden backplate with different length blocks protruding from it. With all that in mind, here's our final plan. Other than the wool which is going inside the Gobo, I have no regular suppliers for the materials I'm going to need for this, so there's going to be a bit of seeing what I can get and making concessions where need be. So while I go and get the materials I'm going to need, please enjoy this brief explanation of how acoustic panels actually work. Now, the bulk of how this kind of acoustic panel works is by converting sound energy to heat. As the sound waves hit the panel, they move through tiny gaps in the panel's materials, and the friction slowly saps them of their energy and stops them. This is boring, so I'm going to gloss past it. And to be clear, what I'm about to discuss isn't that impactful, it's just way more interesting. What we're going to discuss is phase, specifically interference. When two identical waves perfectly line up, they essentially combine and double their energy, or get 3 dB louder. I can talk about the 3 dB rule another time, let me know if that's something you'd want me to do. And we call this constructive interference. Now, when two identical but opposite waves line up, they combine and cancel each other out completely. You're left with silence. We call this destructive interference. So if you're in a room which is 5 units long, and you play from one side a continuous sound with a wavelength of 4 units, when it bounces off that wall and comes back to you, it will double in energy. But if that sound only has a wavelength of 2 units, when it comes back from that wall and overlaps with itself, it becomes its own opposite and cancels itself out. Now, sound does not behave the same way in every material, and the wool material we're using in these panels slows it down a lot, essentially changing where it is along its own wavelength. This means that if you have a problem with either of these interferences through a particular frequency, this acoustic treatment can more or less nullify it if used correctly. However, this is incredibly difficult to engineer accurately and is very frequency specific. Enough of my ramblings, let's get back to this Gobo. So, due to limitations with the wood I was able to get, this Gobo is only going to be 172.5 centimeters tall and 80 centimeters wide. And to ensure that the wool is as densely packed as I need it to be, I'm going to be squashing it down a bit and making the Gobo only 7 centimeters thick, plus its wheels. So with that in mind, here's our step by step. We build the frame, put on the back plate, attach the blocks to it, fill it with wool, fabric over it, put on the wheels and we're done. So let's get to it. So here we are, 7 centimeters thick, 80 wide, 177.5 tall if you include the wheels, diffuser on the back, fits through all the doors, slots in nicely in the spot I've left in storage. Only thing that's left is to test the sound. I did a lot of tests, and if I put them all in this video, it would be way too long and would mainly just show me being out of practice on guitar and bad at the drums. But if you do want to hear all of those with different mics, different gobo positions, different playing styles, there'll be a link in the description to our sample shop where you can get a free pack that has all of the stems. So how did this go? Well, let's start by asking the really simple question, does it work? And the really simple answer is yes, but it's kind of situational. This is a broadband acoustic absorber, and it gets a little bit ineffective on anything under 150 Hz. So if you're recording a source that has any low end to it at all, you have to be really careful with your mic and gobo positioning, or you'll shift the balance of what you capture to be more low end heavy. But if you're recording, say, a guitarist and a vocalist in the same room at the same time, this can be really useful for getting a bit of separation. Or if you're recording some piano and you want the room sound kind of closed in a bit, you can use this to do that. It works really well there. And then I guess the next logical question is it cost effective? And if you have the gear and space you need, it definitely can be. I relied mainly on scrap parts and offcuts for this, and it cost me just under 50 quid to make, which is a lot cheaper than what you'll see online. And it may not be as pretty as the pro stuff or quite as high quality, but at that price it's pretty solid. The area I think you're most likely to struggle is time. From starting planning to finishing the gobo, or whilst trying to work and live a life, it took me nearly 3 months. I could have had it next day if I'd bought it online. But if you've got the time and you've got the gear, I highly recommend this. It was a lot of fun. Cheers for watching, people. And if you've got any tips or advice about making gobos, things you think I've missed, I'd really love to hear it in the comments. All the best.